Right when my girlfriend, Clara, and I were finalizing our plans to get married, her first love, Mark, moved back to town. It was a complication I hadn't anticipated. Mark had married Clara's cousin, Isabel, but he was now a widower, returning home with his young son, Ben. Almost immediately, I saw a shift in Clara. A certain softness returned to her eyes whenever she was around him, a tenderness that felt dangerously familiar. She was constantly at his house, bringing over home-cooked meals and fresh fruit. If his son so much as sneezed, Clara was the first one to volunteer to take him to the hospital. She always referred to Mark as her cousin-in-law, a technically correct but emotionally evasive term. I couldn't be sure what was truly going through her mind, but I saw the dynamic forming between them and chose to remain silent, hoping it was something that would pass. The breaking point arrived unexpectedly. Ben's preschool had a terrible accident, and I was on the scene as one of the responding doctors, performing triage as we were trained. The scene was chaotic. I found Ben with his leg horrifically crushed and bleeding profusely. Just as the last of the initial wave of ambulances was about to leave, Mark, his face streaked with tears, begged me to get Ben on board. But there was another child, one I didn't know, with a critical head injury. Following procedure, I sent the child with the head injury first. It was the correct medical call, the only one to make. Another ambulance arrived 5 minutes later for Ben. Later at the hospital, after what felt like an eternity in the operating room, I finally emerged, exhausted, to tell the family that Ben was stable. Mark was sobbing uncontrollably nearby. "Ben could have had help sooner," he cried out to Clara, his voice thick with accusation. "I begged him to let us go first. He doesn't like me, fine, but why should he take it out on my son?" Clara's gaze met mine, and in her eyes, I saw a storm of hurt, disdain, and anger. It was a look that judged me as the worst kind of person. The irony of the situation was agonizing. The family of the other child, the one I had prioritized, couldn't stop thanking me for saving their son's life, while the woman I loved looked at me as if I had committed a crime. I went over to check on Ben later. His injury had been severe, and the delay in getting to the operating room, exacerbated by the ambulance hitting unexpected traffic, meant that surgeons couldn't save his leg. He had lost it. Mark wouldn't even look at me. He just clung to Clara, weeping. "He loved running and jumping," Mark choked out. "How will he ever be the same? Leo could have saved him." He pleaded with Clara. "Sure, he doesn't like me, but why make Ben suffer?" That accusation hit me like a physical blow. It was true that I wasn't fond of Mark, but the idea that I would ever let my personal feelings compromise the life of a child was unthinkable. "We follow emergency principles," I explained, my voice strained. "The most critical cases go first. That other boy barely made it." I felt a profound sorrow for Ben, a sweet kid who didn't deserve any of this, but I knew that if I were in the same situation again, I would make the exact same choice. I looked to Clara, hoping for a sliver of support, a sign that she trusted my professional judgment. She finally spoke, her voice measured. "I trust Leo made the right call." Mark paused, his eyes welling up again. "Clara, he's your boyfriend. It makes sense you'd stand by him. Ben just has such tough luck. He lost his mom, and now this." Isabel had passed away while they were living abroad, which is what prompted Mark to bring Ben back home. Clara looked down, a wave of guilt washing over her face. "That's not what I meant," she said before glancing at me. Then, she turned back to Mark and spoke softly. "I'm sorry, on Leo's behalf." I froze, my heart sinking into a cold pit in my stomach. She didn't ask me to apologize, but her apology for me felt infinitely worse. I wasn't sure what I was supposed to be sorry for doing my job, for saving another child's life. But I knew one thing with certainty. In this quiet, heartbreaking moment, she had sided with him over me once again. Mark had always been a shadow between us. Back when we were younger, both Clara and her cousin Isabel had feelings for him. That unspoken rivalry was part of why I chose to go to medical school far away from home. When he returned, widowed and with a child, the deep roots of family ties and shared history meant Clara felt an immense obligation to him and Ben. Even when we were together, a call from Mark was all it took for her to drop everything and leave, always expecting me to understand. I could never tell if it was just a sense of family duty she was fulfilling, or if a part of her heart still belonged to him. After I finished my shift, I went to see Ben. The door to his room was slightly ajar, and I could hear voices from within. The room was crowded with family, their faces etched with grief over what had happened. Ben was just beginning to stir, groggy from the anesthesia. His first words were a whispered question. "Did Uncle Leo save my friend?" Mark's eyes filled with tears, and his voice cracked as he answered, "He did. Don't blame Uncle Leo for not saving you." Clara's uncle cut in, his voice sharp. "What's that supposed to mean? Leo didn't save Ben?" Mark then gave a glossed-over version of the events, explaining how I had prioritized another child, leading to the delay that cost Ben his leg. Clara just stood there, looking at him without saying a word. Her aunt grew visibly upset, her voice trembling with anger. "Why didn't Leo save Ben first?" She shot a sharp look at Clara and her parents. Clara's folks hesitated, then, looking embarrassed, began to scold her. "Clara, Leo was wrong. You need to talk some sense into him. He shouldn't be siding with outsiders over family." Clara tried to defend me. Doctors have to operate based on who is in the most danger, not who they know. Leo was just doing his job. But her aunt snapped back. "I don't care about any of that. My grandson could have been okay." Clara's family wasn't usually so unreasonable, but Ben was all they had left of Isabel, and their heartache was overriding their logic. Even if they knew, deep down, that I wasn't wrong, their pain needed a target. Then Mark jumped in, his voice laced with a subtle poison. "Leo doesn't have parents. I guess that means he isn't as attached to the idea of family." The comment made Clara's parents look even more troubled. I stood outside the door, looking down, trying to process it all. Just then, Ben's grandparents arrived, rushing down the hallway. They saw me immediately as they reached the room. Pushing down the intense discomfort, I stepped inside. Every eye in the room turned to me, and it felt like being under an interrogator's spotlight. I had to explain myself. "Everyone feels terrible for Ben," I began. But in that moment, I had to make a difficult decision. I had to send the more severely injured patient to the hospital first. Ben's uncle was furious. "But you're going to be his uncle, your family." "First and foremost, I'm a doctor," I replied. I've never been good at handling these kinds of confrontations. It always feels like I make things worse. Clara pulled me aside, her expression weary. "Do you really think they want an explanation right now? It's pointless." I knew she was probably right, but I felt a desperate need to make my position clear. She rubbed her temples, exhausted. "I'll handle them. You should go back to your dorm." I was staying in the on-site hospital accommodations, which was convenient for my demanding schedule. I glanced at the closed door of the hospital room, knew it was time to leave, and nodded in agreement. The next day, the hospital received a formal complaint against me. It was from Mark's mother, claiming my actions directly caused her grandson to lose a limb. While no one had overreacted in the moment, it was clear their anger had been simmering. I gave my official account of the incident, describing the condition of both patients at the scene. Supported by ambulance footage and testimony from other staff, it was evident that my medical judgment was sound. The complaint didn't go far. I submitted my report, and the matter was closed within 2 days. Even though Mark's mother remained unsatisfied, there was nothing more she could do. Clara's dedication to Ben during his month-long hospital stay was absolute. She visited him daily. When his wounds caused him pain, she would hold him gently, her presence a calming balm until he settled down. I'd sometimes show up to find Mark there too, watching them with a quiet warmth that made them look unnervingly like a family. It reminded me of a dinner we'd all had the night Mark first returned. Clara couldn't seem to take her eyes off him that evening. Watching them in the hospital room felt like seeing those two moments overlap in time. I shook the thought from my head and entered the room. Mark's expression shifted when he saw me, a flicker of impatience he quickly concealed. I asked if they had sorted out the discharge paperwork. Clara finally put Ben down and went to take care of it. Mark began silently packing up Ben's clothes. When Ben said he was thirsty, Mark left to get him some water, leaving me alone with the boy. As soon as his father was gone, Ben tugged on my sleeve. "Uncle Leo," he whispered, "don't be mad at my dad. He's just really, really sad." Even at his young age, he was perceptive enough to pick up on the tension between the adults. He had noticed his father's coldness toward me. I knelt down and asked him gently, "Are you upset with me, Ben?" He shook his head. "Losing my leg makes me sad, but losing my friend would have been worse. The doctor said I'll be able to walk again soon. It's okay." My heart ached hearing those words from a 5-year-old. The past month had been incredibly difficult for me, being misunderstood, feeling alienated, and having my morals judged. It was a heavy burden. Clara felt guilty about Mark and Ben, and she tried to make it right in her own way, which often felt more like an accusation than support. Rationally, she might have taken my side, but emotionally, she was somewhere else entirely. I had already made my case and didn't want to get stuck in a loop of defending myself, so I had let it go. I never expected the truest comfort to come from a child. I pulled a couple of chocolates from my pocket for him and thanked him. Just as he took them, Mark's voice cut through the air. "Ben, what did I say about eating less sweets?" He took the chocolates from his son and made him drink water instead. As we were leaving, I noticed the chocolates I had given Ben in the trash can by the door. After Ben was discharged, Mark seemed to call Clara even more often. Sometimes Ben was upset with phantom pains. Other times it was for follow-up appointments. Sometimes he just wanted Clara's company. Our time alone, already rare, became almost non-existent. It was always about Ben. I felt torn, wanting to ask for time for just the two of us, but then wondering if I was being selfish. The anniversary of Dr. Evans's death arrived. I had grown up with her. She was like family to me, and the reason I became a doctor. She had devoted her life to healing others. 2 years ago, she was trapped in the rubble of a collapsed building after an earthquake. She had pushed others, including Clara, to safety, but she didn't make it out herself. Clara had promised to join me at her memorial. The day was dreary, with a persistent drizzle that matched my mood. I stood waiting for her, lost in thought. When my phone rang, I assumed it was Clara arriving, but her voice on the other end was apologetic. "Leo, Ben's acting up at home. His leg is hurting him again. Do you mind if we do this another day?" My patience, already worn thin, finally snapped. "I need you here," I said, my tone colder than I intended. There was a moment of silence on her end, as if she were startled by my firmness. I pressed on. "Mark is his dad. Ben needs him the most." "Mark is too gentle with him, and Ben gets fussy," Clara reasoned. I wanted to say that Mark, a high-powered executive, was not nearly as weak as she made him out to be, but I held my tongue. I had avoided arguing over these things because I believed relationships required flexibility. But today was different. My stubbornness, however, got me nowhere. She sounded like she was in a hurry, said she'd explain later, and hung up. I stood there, stunned, before heading to the memorial alone. I stood under my umbrella in front of Dr. Evans's tombstone for a long time, not leaving until the sky grew dark. When I got back to my apartment, I was chilled to the bone and damp from the rain. I took a hot shower, and as I stepped out of the bathroom, I heard the front door open. It was Clara. She explained she had come over as soon as she had calmed Ben down. She walked up to me and raised her hand, as if to ruffle my still wet hair, but I instinctively took a small step back, avoiding her touch. Her hand dropped to her side. "Leo, I know I was the one who broke our plans." "I'm sorry," she said softly. "Today was special," I replied, my voice steady as I poured myself a cup of warm water. I didn't show much emotion. "I figured you knew that." She froze, momentarily at a loss for words. "I just felt that paying respects is something we could do any time," she finally said. "You have to prioritize what's more urgent." I paused, the cup halfway to my lips, the warmth seeping into my cold fingertips. Neither of us were prone to emotional outbursts. We were thinkers who disliked arguments, so we rarely fought. I set the cup down and walked to the door. "I'm tired and I want to rest," I said, keeping my emotions in check. "You should go." Clara remained quiet, looking at me for a long moment before she turned and left. She never clung. When we had disagreements, she always gave me space to cool down. I sometimes wondered if that was just her personality, or if she simply didn't love me enough to worry about how upset I might be in that moment. During these cool-down periods, she wouldn't disappear entirely. She'd send texts reminding me about the weather, ask if I'd eaten, and say goodnight. But she never softened her tone to soothe me, and she never reacted when I didn't reply. It was a strange mix of genuine care and detached distance. Our stalemate continued until her parents asked her to bring me home for dinner. I couldn't refuse them. At the dinner, they mentioned that Ben's wound was healing well, and they could start planning for a prosthetic. They seemed more at ease with me now. Then, they brought up our marriage, saying it was time to finalize things. Her mother laid out their condition. "Leo," she said, "you need to quit your job at the hospital before you marry Clara." I was stunned. I glanced at Clara, who seemed just as taken aback. "Your job is too demanding," her mother continued. "I couldn't say much while you were just dating, but marriage means focusing on your family. That's not too much to ask, is it?" I put down my chopsticks, trying to choose my words carefully. "I hadn't planned on giving up my career," I started, but her mother cut me off, visibly displeased. "That's non-negotiable. Quitting your job is the condition for this marriage. Otherwise, forget it. Clara can support you both. Let her handle the career." I frowned, about to argue, when Clara spoke first, taking my hand. "Mom, let me talk to Leo." She led me to another room, her brow furrowed. "Didn't you see how upset my mom got?" she said. "Fighting her on this is pointless." "Pointless?" I echoed. "And what, in your mind, is worth fighting for?" Clara was a top lawyer, and in her logical world, every action had to serve an end goal. She didn't waste energy on what she deemed ineffective. "This dinner is about setting a wedding date. Just agree to her terms for now." She didn't seem to think the request was unreasonable. "It's a hard job with little pay. There's no need to cling to being a doctor. You don't have to argue with my mom about it." Her belittling attitude toward my life's work struck me deeply. In that moment, I felt I had to completely re-evaluate our relationship. There had always been a gap between us, not because I was slow, but because she was brilliant. Everything came easily to her, so the achievements I had to work so hard for seemed trivial in her eyes. Being a doctor meant long hours, frequent overtime, and responding to emergencies at a moment's notice. My salary was a drop in the ocean compared to her earnings. She had the professional pride to dismiss my work without a second thought. Yet I had told her why I became a doctor. Growing up around Dr. Evans, I saw both the suffering of patients and the miracle of new life. I wanted to be like her, dedicating my life to healing. For me, it wasn't just a job, it was a calling. Looking at Clara then, I felt like I was seeing a stranger. "Before we started dating," I said, "I told you my job would be demanding, and you said you would respect that." She took my shoulders, her expression earnest. "I can accept your busy life, but these are my parents' demands. Can't you compromise just this once for me?" I was momentarily speechless. I had compromised so many times before. I had always thought that even if Clara couldn't fully grasp my values, she would at least not actively oppose them. "My parents raised me," she explained. "I can't disregard their feelings." She felt indebted to her parents, so she catered to them. She felt she owed Mark and Ben, so she cared for them. But she owed me nothing. When it came down to a choice, I was never the one who was picked. In her hierarchy of responsibilities, I was always last. "Leo, you need to understand," she said, her tone serious. "Being with me means accepting my burdens." I fell quiet, gazing at her steadily. We had been together for 2 years, but my love for her went back much further. I had genuinely wanted to build a life with her. But now, I hesitated. "I didn't know," I said softly, "that being with you would mean constantly giving up parts of myself with no end in sight. I loved her, but I couldn't lose myself completely for that love." After a tense silence, I looked away. "Then let's just end this." I turned to leave. As she started to follow, she heard me speak to her parents, my voice firm but quiet. "I'm sorry, I won't be staying to finish dinner, and we won't be getting married." As I walked away, I vaguely heard her aunt's discontented voice from inside. "What kind of attitude is that? Does he really think we're okay with him? An orphan with no family? You have better prospects than Isabel did, and she still managed to marry Mark, with his high position and salary. You can do much better." "Mom, stop it," Clara said, her voice sounding helpless. "Dr. Evans saved my life. I promised her I would take good care of Leo for her. He was just saying things in anger." I paused, my face going pale. Her family had never treated me poorly to my face, but I never expected them to think of me that way. Maybe it was only because of Dr. Evans that they had reluctantly accepted me in the first place. Lost in my own sadness, it took me a moment to process the true meaning of Clara's words. What I had thought was a love that had grown over time was really just gratitude in disguise. The urge to go back and confront them vanished. I just walked away. On my way back to the hospital, I saw 2 little kids squatting on the sidewalk, intently watching some bugs crawl by. I spaced out, thinking about when Clara and I were children. She was the first person who didn't find me strange. I was a quiet kid who liked to examine dead insects, a hobby that didn't win me many friends. I was usually alone until one day Clara came over, sat down with a book, and smiled at me. "Your interests are really unique," she'd said. We were neighbors, but that was the start of our friendship. Because of her, my life became a little more vibrant. Then Mark moved in. Unlike me, he had a warm smile and a sharp mind. Slowly, he became the one walking between Clara and her cousin Isabel, while I trailed quietly behind them. It wasn't until I felt a pang of loss and bitterness that I realized my feelings for Clara had changed. But those teenage emotions were crushed when she told me she liked Mark. I left to study medicine in another city and didn't see her for 8 years. When we finally reconnected, those buried feelings resurfaced. I knew I wasn't her ideal partner, but when I volunteered in dangerous disaster zones, she would worry, losing her usual composure. She had moments of believing in me, of speaking up for me. I thought that was love, just maybe not as deep as mine for her. Apparently, I had been wrong all along. I stopped in my tracks on the empty street and let out a soft, choked sob. Maybe Clara thought I would eventually give in, like I always did. She waited for me to change my mind, maintaining her usual cool composure while she went on a business trip. In the end, I mailed the engagement ring back to her. When Ben came to the hospital for a checkup, I found him sitting alone in his wheelchair in the hallway, looking dejected. I hesitated, but he looked up and his eyes brightened when he saw me. I walked over. "Ben, why are you here by yourself?" "Dad went to the restroom," he said. He paused, then asked nervously, "Uncle Leo, did you and Auntie Clara break up? Is it because I always bothered her and you didn't like it? I'm sorry." Then he added, "I don't get why Dad keeps telling me to ask to see Auntie. I like you and Auntie together, but yesterday Dad got mad at me. He said, 'Don't you want to call Auntie Mom?' I thought that was strange. Auntie is Auntie. How can she be Mom?" I frowned, finding the whole thing unsettling. Ben was usually such a smart, well-mannered kid. "Uncle Leo?" Ben's voice brought me back. I ruffled his hair. "It's not your fault, Ben. I have to get back to work now. Be good and wait for your dad." Clara came looking for me as soon as her trip was over. By then, it had been a month since we had last spoken. I had changed the locks on my apartment so her key didn't work. She stood outside my door, clutching the ring box. "Why did you return the ring?" she asked, her voice tight. "We broke up," I replied simply. "It's not right for me to keep it." "I didn't agree to break up," she said, her brows knitting together. "This isn't a childish game, Leo. We were planning our wedding." She stubbornly pushed the ring box back into my hand. I looked at it, then tossed it back toward her. It hit her lightly on the chest and fell to the ground, rolling to a stop at her feet. "I don't want it." "Leo, don't do this," she said, her face tense. "I'm not being dramatic," I said, trying to keep my own emotions in check. "Thanks for giving me a cooling-off period. It gave me time to really think about our issues. If you had come to me sooner, I probably would have just forgiven you again." I saw a flicker of surprise in her eyes. "I always gave in, didn't I?" I said with a slight, humorless laugh. "I'm realizing that trying to be understanding doesn't earn you appreciation, only expectation. I love you, so I was willing to bend, but that doesn't mean I should be the only one who ever has to." I looked at her, truly confused. "Is breaking up really such a bad thing for you? You won't have to marry someone you feel obligated to, someone you don't really love. I heard what you and your aunt said that night. The person who saved you was Dr. Evans. If you want to repay her, you don't need to involve me in it. I don't think her wish would be for me to marry someone who doesn't love me for me." "That's not it," Clara said, her voice steadying. "My parents would have accepted you, and it's not just about responsibility." "Your parents hold a grudge against me that's like a thorn," I countered. "They might bury it, but they'll never remove it. And as for you, how deep are your feelings for me, really? Have you ever noticed my efforts or my growth? Why do you belittle my work? When you care so much about Mark's and your family's feelings, why not mine? Is a boyfriend just supposed to endure everything?" As my questions hung in the air, her phone rang. It was Mark. She hesitated, glancing at me. In that moment of hesitation, everything became clear. She had come here to tell me we weren't breaking up, yet she couldn't bring herself to ignore another man's call. When he showed up, I always lost. I looked away and took a step back, intending to shut the door. She quickly blocked it with her hand. "Go to Mark," I said coldly. "There's no need to struggle. You two seem perfect for each other." "I'm just worried something happened to Ben," she explained quickly. A surge of anger flared in me. Can't you tell his dependence on you has gone too far? Why is it so hard to admit you still have feelings for him? Your knee-jerk reaction is your truest choice. I was tired of the endless entanglement. I tried to close the door again, but she was strong, holding it open. "Tell me what you want," she said, a hint of desperation in her voice. "How can we not break up?" She still didn't get it. "We're divided by principles, by your parents' biases, and by Mark, your shining memory," I said, my voice growing hoarse. "I'm worn out, Clara. I won't love you anymore." I pushed against the door again, my body trembling with the effort. I bit my lip, looking up at her, tears pooling in my eyes but refusing to fall. The resolve to let her go was absolute. Seeing the pain in my bloodshot eyes, her face turned pale, and her hand finally fell away from the door. Life goes on. A few days later, Mark texted me, asking to meet. I stared at the message, then turned off my phone and went into a meeting. When he messaged again, I simply blocked his number. He wasn't used to being ignored and showed up at the hospital looking displeased. We sat at a dessert shop across the street. "What's the point of holding on to someone who doesn't love you, Leo?" he began. "Alice and I could work things out. You know she liked me before. We were both just too stubborn back then. You see how she treats me, how her parents like me. Why force it?" I chuckled. "So you want to be with Clara? Shouldn't you be telling her that, not me? If you were so confident, you wouldn't be here trying to convince me to back off." My smile faded. "First of all, Clara and I broke up. What happens between you two has nothing to do with me. Secondly, let me remind you of something. Her parents like you because you aren't her partner. If you actually tried to become their son-in-law, things might change. The real issue wasn't the small age gap. It was that he was, currently, her brother-in-law. Her conservative parents would see that as a mountain, not a molehill." Mark looked stunned. "I have better qualities than you," he stammered. "I'm better suited for Clara." I shrugged. "Anything else? My break is almost over." As I looked across the street, I saw an elderly woman walking slowly toward the hospital entrance. She seemed unsteady. The next second, she collapsed. I immediately got up and ran. "Leo, I'm not done talking!" Mark yelled after me. When I reached the woman, a security guard was already there. I turned her over. "Mom!" Mark cried out, having followed me. He grabbed my arm. "Leo, please, check on my mom!" I pushed his hand away and assessed her. She was unconscious, with no pulse and no breathing. I started CPR immediately. After 4 agonizing minutes, she regained consciousness, and the medical staff rushed her inside. Mark's mother was saved, but the CPR had fractured 6 of her ribs. When I explained this, his older brother was furious. "So, you're saying you caused my mom's rib injuries? Calling it a complication is just an excuse for your mistake." Clara, who had arrived at some point, tried to intervene. "We should trust the medical professionals." But her family wasn't listening. "He ignored Ben," her father-in-law said. "Who knows if he has a problem with our family?" Mark, who had witnessed the entire thing, just stood there silently, observing me with a cold detachment. Before I could argue further, I got a notification about a multi-car pileup. "If you have doubts, we can deal with this later," I said, and hurried off to prepare for the incoming trauma patients. The work kept me busy until early morning. As I walked out of the surgical wing, my scrubs stained with dried blood, Clara was there waiting for me. "Why are you still here?" I asked, surprised. "I wanted to wait for you," she said, her eyes shining. She looked toward the recovery rooms. "Did they all make it?" I nodded. "Yes, they all made it." A smile touched her lips as tears welled in her eyes. "I used to just think you were dedicated to your job, and I'd politely put up with your schedule, but seeing you out there, calmly treating patients while racing against time, it made me see things differently. Watching you left me in awe. I realized the boy who once clumsily bandaged my scraped knee has grown into someone remarkable." "You were right, Leo. I never really saw you for who you were. During those hours, I watched families go from despair to relief, and I finally understood the meaning behind your work." She reached out and smoothed my hair. "I'm so proud of you." I looked up at her, surprised. It was the acknowledgement I had craved for so long, but now that it had come, after everything, it felt bittersweet. I was too exhausted to talk. I just wanted to sleep. As I headed to my dorm, she handed me a warm snack. "Eat up and get some rest," she said, and then she left. A few days later, I received a subpoena. Mark's family was suing me, claiming malpractice and personal bias. Clara came to see me immediately. "I already talked to Mark," she said, "but he claims his father and brothers are insisting, and he can't persuade them." I laughed sarcastically. I knew Mark had offered to make it go away if I left town and stayed away from her. "Are you here to tell me to give in, like last time?" I asked. "No," she said, shaking her head. I know paying them off would just insult your professionalism, and you'd end up hating me. I'll keep talking to them, and I'll try to avoid a court case. But if it comes to that, I'll help you fight this. You do what you feel is right. I'll handle the rest." I tilted my head, looking at her as if for the first time. "You've changed a bit?" She gave a small, sad smile. I finally realized changes were needed, even if it cost me you. True to her word, she handled it. A few days later, the lawsuit was dropped. I felt I owed her a thank you dinner. When I invited her, she asked if she could plan the day. I agreed. On our day off, she took me to places from our past, fulfilling promises we had left unkept. We ended the day at a new open-air restaurant overlooking a lake as the sun set. "I read once that people find love through the pain of separation," she said softly. "You might think I'm foolish for needing you to leave before realizing how deeply I care. The night you wouldn't take the ring back, I kept replaying your words, and I realized how unfit I was as your girlfriend. I admit, I wasn't unaffected when Mark returned. I kept helping him, partly out of obligation, but also out of some lingering childhood emotion. I relied on your love for me, thinking you'd never give up. But I'm sure now, I have no other feelings for Mark. He's just a brother to me. I was wrong to downplay your work and your achievements. I'll change, Leo. I'll respect you. I'll cherish you. Can we please start over?" I listened to her seriously. "If I had heard this sooner, maybe things would be different," I said quietly. "I didn't always intend to never leave you. When I went away to medical school at 18, I was giving up on you. I knew you liked Mark." Her eyes widened. She never knew. I won't deny the good times we had, but I also felt wronged and humbled in our relationship. I started evaluating myself by your standards, your parents' standards, even by Mark's. Without being your boyfriend, I can just be myself. It's a lot lighter. I see your changes, Clara, and I appreciate them. But it's a shame. When I loved you most, your feelings weren't as deep. Now that you've finally learned how to love me, I'm already over it. Our love had a time lag. It's over now. Let's both move forward, okay?" She was persistent. "I don't want to give up. Before, our feelings weren't equal. You were more deeply involved. Now it's my turn to wait. That seems fair." After a moment of silence, I confessed, "The hospital has given me an opportunity to study abroad. This meal isn't just to thank you. It's also a farewell." On the day I was set to leave, she somehow found out. Her call came as I was heading to the airport, her voice urgent, asking me to wait, just to see me one last time. But we had already said our goodbyes. Meeting again would only create unnecessary emotional strings. Once I was at the airport, I went straight through check-in and security. Just as I got my documents back from the agent, I heard a familiar voice calling my name over and over. It was Clara, searching the crowd, slightly out of breath and without any of her usual composure. I paused for a second, my grip tightening on my suitcase handle. But in the end, I didn't turn around. I continued toward the gate, drifting further away from her through the crowd. Just like I said, let's both move forward.